Hi everybody and welcome back to Tonai Talks Mythbusting edition. Today we're going to be looking at sensory processing. Kath Bailey is joining us again to give us an overview of what this is and how we can support it. As always guys, if you are interested in our Mythbusting series, you're more than welcome to check it out on our YouTube channel. And we will be looking to start up again live sessions moving forward, which you can access through the QR code on the screen. So before we start, Kath, I'm just wondering if you could give us a little overview of what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, thanks, Caitlin. Hi, everyone. So today's session, as Caitlin said, is going to be looking at sensory processing. So we're going to be looking at what sensory processing actually is, how that might present in our children, and what we can do to support our children who may have sensory processing differences.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much, Kath. And on that note, we can get started. So it brings me to my first question. What is sensory processing?
Well, sensory processing relates to the body's ability to take in information from the senses, organise the information within the brain, and respond appropriately within the environment, as you can see on that diagram in front of you. Some children have differences in the way in which they process sensory information. So, for example, some children's systems can take in too much information, so they become overwhelmed by their environment. Some children's systems need more information to register sensory feedback, so they might seek out different experiences in their environment. The ability to regulate the amount of sensory feedback our body needs is called modulation. It's particularly important to identify sensory differences children are experiencing within the classroom as being dysregulated, as this can have a huge impact on their ability to learn.
Okay, Kath. So essentially, sensory processing is kind of what we take in from the outside world in terms of our senses, and how that can impact us and the way we interact with the world. So if a child was to have sensory processing difficulties or differences, how may we see that in the classroom?
Okay, well, there's lots of behaviours that we observe frequently in the classroom when a child has a difference in their sensory processing. So, for example, some children may be unable to tolerate noises within the classroom. So this can be as much as a loud lesson or just the sound of chairs moving across the floor or pencils moving across the paper. You know, we might see children put their hands to their ears, or actually the noise can cause physical pain to these children with this difference. Other children might dislike having their hands or body messy. So things like artwork, painting, putting their hands in sand. This may be a really difficult experience for them. Other children may have poor body awareness during activities such as PE. So, for example, some children may fall over other children. They may have a very different sense of space. And this poor body awareness is quite apparent during PE, for example, as I've said. Other children may appear very energetic, always on the go. So you might see children finding it difficult, to sit still during their lesson. You may see constant fidgeting, getting up and down off their chair, moving about. Others find it difficult to calm down after certain activities. So it may be that they've gone out to PE or they've had playtime or lunchtime and they've, had sort of very excitable experiences. And then when they come back into the classroom, they find it difficult to calm down after those exciting experiences. Others may chew on their pencil or their clothing. So you may see children with holes in the sleeves of their school jumpers because they've chewed their way through them. Others may have difficulties in copying work from the board. Others may appear distractible or as though they're not paying attention. So basically, there's a huge range of behaviours that we may observe, which could be explained by a sensory difference. So the strategies that we put in place to support children with sensory differences are used to modulate arousal levels to make sure that children are at the optimum level of arousal to be able to access their learning experiences.
My goodness, Kath, like you said, there's a huge range of things and behaviours and experiences we might see when a child is having difficulty with their sensory processing. I'm just wondering, because there is such a range, is there anything that can help us kind of remember these differences and what the best kind of support for these differences are?
That's a good question, Caitlin, because there's a lot of information to process here. But sometimes it's helpful to consider children as presenting in different zones. And often we use Winnie the Pooh characters to describe these different zones. And this can be a really helpful comparison in trying to remember how the children are presenting and what might be useful in terms of modulating their arousal levels. So, for example, you can see the Eeyore character on your screen in front of you. So children who are in the Eeyore zone present with low energy, they're unable to focus on an activity, they have low motivation levels, and they might present as tired or fatigued. The Tigger zone, you see Tigger there, as you would expect. Tigger is high energy. The child could be distractible. They move around frequently, and they can be quite agitated, just like Tigger in Winnie the Pooh. Winnie the Pooh, the Winnie the Pooh zone is just right. The Winnie zone, the child in that zone is able to concentrate in activities, is motivated, has modulated their arousal levels to a maximum level so that they are able to learn and access the curriculum. So children can move between each of these zones at various points throughout the day. However, we want to try and keep them in the Winnie zone as often as possible so that they're able to remain focused on their activities and learn new skills.
Okay, so that's a really interesting way to think about, and having these characters can be really helpful when we're trying to remember, what kind of differences there may be in sensory processing. You mentioned the Tigger zone, and a child who's in that zone can present as being high energy, distractible, moving around often, and agitated. So I'm wondering, what can we do to support children who are in a Tigger zone?
So in our classrooms or at home, when our children are in Tigger zone, as you quite rightly said, they're in that high energy, high movement state. So naturally, children need activities that will be calming to their system, to bring them back down. So activities such as slow, rhythmical, linear movements, such as swinging slowly on a swing, or using a wobble cushion in the classroom can provide subtle feedback to the vestibular system whilst engaging in a lesson. And that can be very calming for the child who's in that Tigger zone. Other strategies can relate to deep pressure techniques, such as wrapping children up or supporting them to wrap themselves up in a blanket, for example, or squishing them between cushions or bean bags. We can also use weighted equipment, such as a weighted laptop or a compression vest to help bring those levels of arousal down. And wearing clothing that provides that deep tension can be very, very calming for the child. Other activities that we can do revolve around heavy muscle activities. So this relates to any activity that requires whole body movement, such as playing on outdoor playground equipment, asking children to hang up coats and bags on their pegs in the classroom. It might be stacking or unstacking chairs, pulling resistance bands, little mini exercise circuits like wall push-ups or squats, chair dips, animal walks, anything that involves heavy muscle activity. It could also relate to carrying heavy items, such as carrying books to another classroom or running an errand by taking a heavy item to another teacher. It might revolve around wiping down tables after lunchtime or desks after art. Could be chewy items for the top of pencils, but all these activities involve heavy muscles, and they can be regulating for a child who is in that trigger zone. Additionally, if we're lucky enough to have space in our classrooms or in our schools or even at home, we can create sensory spaces. And this is an area which is identified within the school that has minimal sensory input, such as soft lighting and minimal noise, use of calming sounds, relaxing smells such as lavender or chamomile, and access to blankets or cushions that children can get under. And what might be useful about these spaces is to encourage the child to use them after accessing stimulating environments, such as we've already said, after playtime or PE lessons, when they are likely to be in this trigger zone, and this will hopefully help them regulate.
Mm-hmm. So I suppose a child who's in the trigger zone is essentially overstimulated. You know, the environment is too much for them and it's too overwhelming. So any strategies to support a child in this zone would be around helping them to spend some of that energy, you know, that they've kind of built up as a result of this, and allowing them to kind of seek sensory input in a way that's kind of safer and is kind of more in line with what they need in that moment.
Absolutely.
Fantastic, Kath. So then we talked about kind of another zone with the ER zone, which is a child who presents as kind of low energy, unable to focus, low motivation and fatigue. So then how would we go about supporting an ER child?
Okay, so when in this zone, you know, as we've already described, children will need activities that are alerting to their sensory systems. We need to wake them up. So it's important not to over alert the sensory system of a child who's in the E or zone. So the following activities should often be followed by more calming activities. So, for example, movement breaks. These should be provided little but often, and they should be adopted around times that the child is expected to concentrate. Again, mini exercise circuits can wake the child's sensory system up, if you like. Running errands, such as taking items from one room to another or delivering a message to a teacher in another room. Standing up and stretching. Lots of teachers use different yoga activities for children in their classroom. Sitting or bouncing on a therapy or an exercise ball during lessons or in between lessons can help in this zone. And encouraging alternative positions for activities, such as lying on their tummy for circle time, sitting on a beanbag, high kneeling to catch a ball. All of these activities will help wake up a flat sensory system. Things like dancing games, like, you know, musical statues, Tigger games are really easy things that can be used to support, and also having access to outdoor space and play equipment. But as I said, it's important, you know, when we're running these strategies with our children, that we don't over alert the system and then move them into the trigger zone. So these activities need to be regulated in themselves and should often be followed by more calming activities. Other ways of waking up our sensory system is by offering different tactile experiences. So, for example, mixing up different textures into activities to keep the child's system guessing. So, for example, using sensory bins with different touch sensations, messy play, baking. All these things are really, really helpful in keeping the child's system guessing. We can use vibration to wake up systems. So you can purchase vibrating stuffed animals, vibrating cushions from online retailers, and also you can use a vibrating toothbrush in the morning as part of the daily routine. Having a cold drink can be helpful, or having access to crunchy snacks such as carrot sticks during break times. All these are simple strategies that can be easily utilised, easily offered, which can make a huge, huge difference. And then thinking about the auditory sensory system, so using sound to wake up the system, using different kinds of music with different beats, encouraging singing games during activities, playing with musical instruments. All of these things can be really, really helpful. And then finally, thinking about our visual system, it can be helpful to introduce bright colours into lesson materials, use bright contrasting pages or tools like pencils and scissors. Light up toys or sensory lighting within the environment can be helpful. And playing games that require movement and require following moving objects with their vision, such as throwing or catching a ball. So there's lots and lots of things that target each sensory system, which can be really, really helpful in waking up the child who's in the EO zone, as it were.
Absolutely, because like you said, it sounds as if the child in the EO zone, they're not having as much sensory input as perhaps we would like them to. So it is about just kind of gently warming them up to their environment and their surroundings so they can get that engagement and that input, which is going to be, kind of fantastic for their brain and their processing. So we kind of got the best of both worlds with the Winnie zone. I think you described it as being just right.
Yeah.
So when we have a child who is in the just right Winnie zone, how do we keep them there?
Okay, yeah. I mean, this is what we're aiming for. We want our children to be in that just right zone, in that Winnie zone. And it's so important that children are in this calm, well-regulated state, so that they can attend to engage in their daily activities. Some children need more or less feedback than others to keep them calm and alert during the day. And as I've already said, this is called modulation. So the kind of feedback a child needs will be different for each sensory system. So it's really important to provide a daily plan of strategies and activities that provide the regular feedback a child needs to the sensory system to allow them to stay calm, alert, and engaged in their daily routine. And you might have heard this referred to as a sensory diet.
Okay, that's an interesting term. I haven't heard that before. So I'm wondering then, how do we kind of go about developing that sensory diet for the classroom or for our children?
Yeah, it's sensory diet. It sounds funny, doesn't it? It sounds like it might relate to food, but it's not. It's not related to food. It's very much related to the sensory experiences that the child will require throughout the day to keep them calm and regulated.
Making sure they get what they need sensory-wise.
Absolutely. So when our child comes into school, what zone are they arriving in? Have they arrived in the Tigger zone, or have they arrived in the EO zone? And when we're working with our children, our parents and our class teachers know our children best of all. So they will be able to tell whether children move into different zones at specific times of the day. So, for example, are they Tigger when they arrive at school, as we've already said? Are they EO when they arrive at school? What happens after playtime? Are they do they revert from Winnie to Tigger? So it's about really, getting to know your child and, the zones that they go through at various points in the school day. And then using the strategies that we've already discussed from the Tigger zone, from the EO zone, and incorporating those strategies throughout the child's daily routine to ensure they get the feedback they need to keep them calm and regulated. And if you notice that your child's arousal levels are changing, consider introducing a new strategy to help them stay regulated. So it's about monitoring your child's levels of arousal throughout the day. I think it's worth bearing in mind that it's much easier to keep a child in the Winnie zone, in the just right zone, than trying to get them out of the Tigger zone. So it's about really working preventatively, really, and making sure that we use the strategies every day to prevent a child moving into the TIGA zone or the EOR zone, even if they appear to be regulated. So, you know, sometimes we go into classrooms and teachers say, oh, they're absolutely fine, they're regulated. And then all of a sudden, then something happens which tips the child into the TIGA zone or the EOR zone. So it's about really working preventatively with these sensory strategies and putting them into place at regular points throughout the day to avoid that slip into TIGA or EOR. It's also really helpful to teach the child about their own sensory needs and arousal levels, because this can help them develop independence and self-regulation. And there are some really useful resources which we use to support children's understanding. So, for example, the zones of regulation is an evidence-based strategy, which is used frequently across schools. And this is a sensory-based curriculum designed by occupational therapists that can be delivered by teaching staff to support children in developing skills in self-regulation and emotional control. So I think if there's one sort of website to have a look at in more detail, it would be the zones of regulation, because it's deemed and found to be really, really effective in teaching the children about their sensory needs.
We will link the website, guys, in the description, so you can kind of pop down to there if you're interested in having another look. So I suppose the question from here then, we kind of looked at this sensory diet that we can help our children to kind of get what they need from their environment, sensory, and process it in a way that's helpful for them. So is there any kind of equipment that would be particularly helpful or useful in supporting that sensory diet?
Yeah, there is equipment that can be useful. I think with you know, when considering equipment, I think when parents and class teachers put any search into a search engine for sensory equipment, the minute you put the word sensory in it, the price seems to go up. So I think it's about, you know, using equipment that is really readily and cheaply available to us, and trying things out, really. You know, what works for one child won't necessarily work for another. So I would definitely not advocate going out and buying lots of expensive equipment, because it's unnecessary and may or may not be effective. But there's no doubt about it, sensory equipment can help to provide a child with the feedback they need, or support them to reduce the amount of feedback they receive. So general sensory equipment ideas may be sort of outdoor trampolines with safety netting. You know, I know lots of families have these in their gardens, but if families or schools don't have the space or the resources for outdoor trampolines, you can have access to indoor mini exercise trampolines. I think they're called trampettes. So they take up less space, they're smaller, but they provide the same function. Access to bikes, scooters, roller skates, you know, these things children have access to on a daily basis at school, but they're really, really important in regulation. Weighted cutlery, this can be helpful, and weighted school equipment, so things like pens and pencils can be weighted, and you know, again, this can be really, really effective in helping with regulation. Things like dimmer switches for main lights or lamps to reduce visual feedback are commonly used. And large cushions, bean bags for squishing or crashing activities. Again, they are fairly cheap to purchase, and often we've got them in our homes and schools already, so we don't need to go out and buy any kind of specialist bean bags or cushions at a high cost to us. Sometimes gentle rocking activities such as using a hammock can be nice for children, and you know, lots of outdoor garden equipment, swing sets, things like that can be really, really helpful. Just large open spaces for rolling, for obstacle courses, so we can make use of our local parks, any outdoor space that schools have access to, or gardens if we're lucky enough to have one. And things like lycra clothing, so skins that you can buy really, really cheaply in sports shops provide the same function. Tight-fitting bed sheets can be really, really useful. But I think, what's really worth noting is that children, must be supervised at all times during the use of any sensory-based equipment, as we would with any activity that our children are engaging with. That we need to be really, really careful in how they're using the equipment and make sure they've got the appropriate supervision.
Thank you so much, because I think there was a really kind of comprehensive list there of things that might be helpful, and like you said, kind of increasing our children's sensory input, but also being able to regulate it if it's a little bit too much for them in that moment. So I suppose my final question would be, if I'm a parent who feels that my child is having or experiencing sensory differences, what can I do, or what should I do?
Okay, yeah, well, if you've got any queries or concern regarding your child's possible sensory differences, I think the first place to go is your school, really, for advice. And they may be able to advise on strategies that they're using in the classroom, which you can use at home, or they may be able to signpost to other services which may be helpful. In some health boards, parents are also able to make self-referrals to the occupational therapy teams within their health board. So that there is that opportunity as well. But I think in the first instance, school is the first port of call, really, and discuss your concerns with your child's class teacher.
Absolutely. I think, I totally agree, Kath. It's as much as we can put things in place at home, if we need that further support, school's the best place for it. And, that there may be something the school can learn from you from that conversation. Absolutely. And maybe able to implement when your child is in school. So thank you so much for joining us, everyone, for our Tonai Talks today on sensory processing. Kath, thank you very much for another wonderful talk. And I'm sure this is something that's going to be really helpful to a lot of parents and professionals out there who may be working with or living with children who are experiencing sensory differences. As always, guys, we do have other videos in our Mythbusting series, so if you are interested, please check those out. We've got a range of topics there, from Mythbusting autism to PDA, so you can have a look at those in your own time. But thank you so much for joining us today, and we shall see you soon.
Yeah, thanks everyone. See you soon for the next session.
Diolch yn fawr.